Our guest, Jinx.
Well,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I've been here for a while. I forgot what.
Go ahead.
No, please.
Our guest now is opposition spokesman on finance, Member of Parliament, Mr. Julian Robinson, to talk about what everyone would have heard, the budget last Tuesday, I think it was. Morning, sir. Welcome to Smile Jamaica. How are you, sir?
Morning, Burtis. Morning, Simone, and morning to your viewers.
Morning.
Great to have you with us, sir. You said first, let's get this out of the way, that some of the initiatives announced by the government are a step in the right direction. So you didn't just decide to get up and say, I just cuss because I'm the opposition.
No.
I'm the opposition.
No,
So,
I think there were some constructive things, on the side of, for example, moving people from contract into permanent employment. That's something that's good. And I think we need to do it across the board because we have too many people in the government service who perpetually are put on one-year contracts. So we need to, it's a start. He started with the garbage truck people. We need to do it across the board. That's a good initiative. That's not something that anybody could argue against. So we saw things in the budget which we felt were steps in the right direction, which as an opposition we have no issue with.
yeah.
More things in the wrong direction than in the right?
What I would say, I think there needs to be more done. There are steps in the right direction, but there need to be more fundamental shifts. So I think there has to be more to protect the most vulnerable. When we looked at what PATH works out to for a person on an annual basis, $30,000 a year, which works out on a weekly basis to be just about $600 a week. That's clearly woefully insufficient. So you need to do more to protect the most vulnerable. But really what I spoke to is having a shift from what I call a low-wage, low-tech economy to a higher value-added economy. And the things that we need to make investments in to ensure that we can make that transition. So I spoke about investments in agriculture, in irrigation, in R&D, in increasing access to funding. I spoke about what we need to do in catalyzing the renewable energy industry, which quite frankly has been stagnant for a long time because the government hasn't added renewable energy generating capacity to the grid. I spoke about what we can do in the blue economy, which is protecting our environment, but also having a financial benefit by taking advantage of what we call blue bonds. I spoke about how we can get more out of the logistics sector, which is not something the government is going to invest in, but the government provides the enabling environment so that the private sector will grow. So I identified very specific areas that I believe with more focus, more attention, we can have that shift away from what I call the low-wage, low-tech economy to something which is higher value added. And you might ask why I raise that as an issue. I raise it because if you look at Jamaica's growth over the 60-year period, on an annual basis, we have only grown by about 1% and a little over. If you look at our current scenario, where we have a low unemployment rate of just over 6%, but why are there so many Jamaicans who are struggling and suffering in an environment where you have very low levels of unemployment? And it really speaks to a structural issue of what I call that low-wage, low-tech economy. And they need to invest starting now to move to that higher value-added type economy.
With $1 trillion budget for the first time, you would have thought that everything would have been covered. You kind of went over most of what you spoke about. But you said it didn't go far enough, even with the $1 trillion. So let's be a little bit more specific. You kind of brushed everything. So,
and I wanted to follow up on that because the areas that you've mentioned are areas that I have heard the government speak to and say that they're doing work in blue economy, logistics, technology and technological advancements. So is it that you think not enough is being done quickly enough, or?
What I would say, there needs to be first an intent that you need to move away from what we have now. So as I said, I've acknowledged that stuff is being done. We have investment in the logistics center economy, but I believe there's a lot more that we can take advantage of so that we can move further up the value chain. For example, in STEM-based education, there's a proposal to build 6 or 7 schools. We are saying use those funds and ensure that you have STEM in every single school. So I'm not saying nothing is being done in those areas, but I believe there needs to be more focus, more attention, and more resources in particular areas which can stimulate growth. If you take R&D in agriculture, and I looked at what is allocated now, it is not sufficient to provide farmers with the kind of support that we can both achieve food security and enhance our export earnings. What kind of seeds you're supposed to plant? How are you supposed to do that? So you reduce losses, right? That's the kind of support that farmers need, so that when they make the investments, they don't have huge losses down the road. So again, I'm not saying nothing is being done in those areas. I'm saying more needs to be done. But to come back to your question, Burgess, the two big issues that I believe most Jamaicans are struggling with is the very high crime rate, and secondly, the issue of cost of living. Now, on the high crime rate, yes, we've made a lot of investments in equipping our police and our soldiers. What we haven't done enough is to cut off the stream of persons who see criminality as an option. There are too many youngsters who leave high school at 15, 16, without the skills, being illiterate, being illiterate. Where are the programs that will steer those youngsters into something where they can build and develop a skill, develop a trade that they don't see being recruited into the gang as an option? You're going to have people who will go that route, but I believe we need to do more to cut off the flow. So but in parallel with supporting what I would say is law enforcement, you need to put resources in initiatives that can prevent more people from getting into criminality, as an example. Like what, sir?
Like what? Initiatives like what?
To be specific, I believe we need more programs for youth at risk and unattached youth, where they can go into a residential camp, where they can spend a couple of weeks, a couple of months. They can come out, they leave with a skill, they leave with something which helps to re-socialize them, as a specific example. I believe we need to do more with programs, as an example, like the Peace Management Initiative, which had its own challenges, but which, as a program, you had what we call violence interrupters, which went into areas intermediate in conflicts between particular communities and prevented the escalation of gang violence. Those are specific initiatives that I believe require funding, a deliberate focus on social intervention, while you continue to support law enforcement, as examples.
You said you questioned how the budget will help the estimated 50% of households headed by women, small farmers or vendors struggling to send their children to school. Speak to that for me, please.
Is this a minimum wage issue?
It's a big issue because all the studies show that women earn about 60% of what men earn. And we know many of our households are headed by women. So we also have to look at what incentives can we put in place for female-headed households who carry the burden of they have to work, and they generally work in what I call the low-wage sector. Many of them, the majority of them are domestic helpers. They are also predominant in the BPO industry, in the hospitality industry, but they are the ones who support the households. What incentives can we provide for those single-headed female households, as an example, so that you ease the burden that they face carrying the entire house? Because they're not just supporting themselves, they're sending the kids to school, and they have all other expenses that they support. So I look, for example, at what is a livable wage? How can the government calculate a livable wage? Looking at what it takes for an individual to provide one nutritional meal a day, which is about $600, which works out to be about $4,200 a week. So I didn't put a figure out there as to what that should be, but what I called for the Ministry of Labor in doing the calculation to have those things into consideration and to build in a periodic assessment, so that whether it is annual or every 2 years, that there is a built-in assessment to determine what that minimum wage should move to. So you protect those who are at the lowest level of our society, who are most vulnerable, and who struggle every day just to make ends meet. I spoke about the need to ensure that we have a proper public transportation system. That is important because, again, the people who take the JUTC tend to be our lowest wage earners. And you have a situation now where people are waiting 2 hours and upwards to get a JUTC bus, while the government has increased licenses for taxis, which puts taxis in a position where they have to hustle to try and get $1 from that person. So we have to have a JUTC that works. It's important for productivity, for efficiency in the society, and also just for good order in what we see on the roads, as an example.
I want to ask you a high-level question. Based on everything you've said and putting everything into the context of the economy, there seems to be a lot of optimism from outside Jamaica particularly. your feeling as opposition spokesman on finance and the public service as to where we stand economically as a country.
No, I think we've recovered well from COVID. We had a very steep fall where we lost about between 12 to 13% of GDP. In the last 2 years, we've recovered well to get back to pre-COVID levels. So at the macro level, I believe we're doing well. I think the issue is how you translate that performance to ensure that people at the micro level feel that they can benefit from those gains. And I think that is where it still remains a disconnect, because you see too many people at the micro level who are just struggling at this point simply to make ends meet. And in an environment where you would have what you call record low unemployment, there are still too many Jamaicans outside the formal labor force and too many Jamaicans who are looking for an opportunity, even with what you call record low unemployment levels. So we're not arguing about where we are at the micro level. I think what we have seen, the confidence is well placed based on what we have done with the recovery after COVID. Now what we have to do is move to ensure that the broader population benefits from the sacrifices that we're making.
Yeah, a couple more, because we're almost out of time. You mentioned the PATH program, and the criteria seems ridiculous, because I'm hearing like if you have a fridge, you can't be on the PATH program or stuff like that. How you get around that?
It's a difficulty. I can tell you as a member of parliament, and I think other members of parliament have the same issue. We recommend people who we know are in need. But when an assessment is done, when a visit is done, you may go into the house. It might be a one-room structure. You see a TV, you see a stove, you see a fridge, which are pretty much very basic items that everybody has to have to survive. And there's an assessment made that probably this person is not in need, and they don't get on the program. So there's an issue getting more people on the program to look at the basis and the criteria for eligibility, and a need for more social workers to go out there and make the assessments. Yeah. Many times people make an application, they don't hear back, they don't get a visit, and so they're left in limbo. Yeah. And even in cases where we are following up as representatives to find out what is happening, you have grave difficulties finding out why. And PATH doesn't necessarily give you an answer as to why somebody is not eligible. So in some cases, people are left to assume or ponder the reasons why they didn't get on the program.
Yep. Yeah, one more question, Sir Julian, before you go. A paper yesterday, the Gleaner yesterday, showing the polls tightening, your party leader looking like he's doing really well. I want your feedback on that, one. But two, if it is that your party forms the next government, will you be able to deliver on these things that you are raising this morning?
Well, first, I think the polls are encouraging for the party. They are a step in the right direction. It means we have to continue our work, explaining to Jamaicans what we would do differently as a party, explaining what our programs are going to be, what our policies are going to be. So it is encouraging, not something to be complacent about at all, because we're about halfway mark in the term. So there's still a lot of work to be done. What we have outlined here are things that we believe are fundamental to moving the economy from what I call a low-wage, low-skill economy to something which is higher value add, so you can lift the standard of living for the majority of people. It's not something that can be done in one budget cycle at all, but it has to be something where there's an intent to do it over a period, to invest in particular sectors and areas of our economy, which will lead to that transition. So yes, that is something we're committed to as a party and something that we would do. And when we get closer to the period of outlining or specific manifesto commitments, those will be part of it.
Thanks for speaking with us this morning, sir. God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, sir. Opposition spokesman on finance and public service, Member of Parliament, Mr. Julian Robinson. Soon come. Stay with us, please.